Good evening, and welcome to this edition of the Slave Food Conversations, where two African American physicians explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in African American communities, irrespective of income. They discover eating a whole food, plant based diet in urban communities is possible and is the key to eliminating health disparities. Dr. Columbus D. Batiste is an interventional cardiologist in Southern California. Dr. Batiste is a passionate double board certified intervention cardiologist who has incorporated the power of a whole food plant-based diet combined with exercise and stress reduction in his management of patients. Dr. Eric Walsh serves as the medical director for urgent care services. Dr. Walsh has a double doctorate in medicine and public health. Dr. Walsh is passionate about educating people on ways to improve their mental, physical, and spiritual health. As a result, he has taken his God-given talents across the world and has given lectures and sermons on every continent. As the Slave Food team rounds out and closes out the Black History Month, we are fortunate to have our special guest, who is a legendary guest, Dr. Jessica B. Harris. Dr. Harris is an American culinary historian, college professor, cookbook author, and author of more than 15 books. She is a journalist. She is an expert on food and the food of the African American diaspora. She has published 15 books, as I mentioned, and her primary subjects are culinary history, foodways, and recipes of the African diaspora. Harris was a 2004 winner of the Lifetime Achievement Awards for the Southern Foodways Alliance and a 2010 James Beard Foundation Special Awards honoree. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show as the doctors dive into the topic of the food diaspora.
Thank you, Didnt. Dr. Harris, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. You know, as of late, it seems like I'm giddy. And I think right now we have you on mute right now. But I want to say, I'm gonna go ahead and start while we switch you over.
You muted me so I couldn't talk back. I know how.
That's right. That's how I get some answers in when I'm at home, right?
Beautiful. Taking advantage of an old lady.
Oh, come on. I don't see any old lady on this screen now. Come on. It's a pleasure having you. You know, I was sitting here and I was reaching out to Eric about a year or two ago. I was like, man, you have to get this book. You need to listen to this professor, Jessica B. Harris. I love it. And so I've been following you. I'm not sure exactly how I stumbled on and found you. Even my kids know you because I would listen on the audiobook driving in, and I became mesmerized by your rich voice, the passion, the knowledge. And so it's a pleasure. I'm so thankful that you agreed to kind of join us on this show here today.
Well, thank you.
Oh. Eric, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. I know that Dr. Harris's work is second to none, and a lot of what we talk about, we often talk about the history of food and Black people, and to have someone that is their expertise is actually quite exciting. So I'm looking forward to our time together.
Yeah, you got your pen ready? I got my pen ready. I'm ready to take notes.
I got mine too.
By the professor.
The thing that Didnt may not have said is that I actually am a college professor, retired, and taught for 50 years. So, gentlemen, I should warn you, there will be a pop quiz when this is
over. Understood. Now you have my stress hormones going. I'm nervous thinking I'm back in class.
There you go.
All right. So out the gate, first question number one. You're a world traveler. Tell me your top 3 favorite countries.
Well, I used to have a thing that I would say, which is I am American by passport. I am probably French in my head. I am Beninoise in my stomach. Senegalese in my heart and Bahian in my soul. So that takes care of a lot of places, but that's not all of them. I have a lot of special spots.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. That number one, you've had that experience of kind of going all over and doing these things. And so, I mean, your life seems as if it's been rich and it's still being enriched going forward right now. Is that right?
Right now. I like to hope so. I like to hope so. No, the thing is that, time and place and how you live, how your parents raise you. I'm an only child. That made a difference. The more children in the family, unless the family is particularly wealthy, the harder it gets, the tighter it gets. Our traditional African American thing about, well, maybe educate the older ones and then they'll help educate the younger ones. There are all kinds of things that have operated in that, but I, as an only child, didn't have any of those problems. So it was just like, okay, she gets it all. So I'm really lucky on that.
Yeah, that wasn't my story, being the youngest of five, but I can definitely appreciate that.
No, but that's what often happens. And I'm going to call you Dr. E and Dr. C because the rest of this gets way too formal. You can call me Dr. J if you want to, but I mean, this doctor, and what's a PhD and what's a MD, and I know the difference, so don't give me the Mrs. Biden, Dr. Biden thing. I do not make house calls.
No. Yeah, well, you can call me Columbus. All right, you call me.
You
Columbus.
definitely call me Eric.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, then y'all call me Jessica because that's just it all gets too crazy. But anyhow, my point is simply, see, that's what happens when we talk too long. I forget the point. But what I was trying to say is that paradigm, the older kids often get educated and then go about their way rejoicing, leaving the younger kids to fend for themselves. And that's a problem too. So, it was a good paradigm. It doesn't always work.
So as we transition into, tell me, how'd you get interested in history and specifically culinary history?
I think I've always been interested in history. History is just something that's fun. It's like I am probably by inclination nosy. And the fact, I see my camera has frozen, but I'm going to let y'all just, if I try to unfreeze it, I'll lose the train of thought and we'll spend the hour with me and my camera. But I think I've always been interested in history because I'm basically nosy. But along with being interested in history because I'm nosy, I had, as I said, many benefits and privileges by being an only child, striving parents and, striving aspirational parents. So I am the first non-UN child to go to the United Nations International School in New York, which means that I grew up with people from around the world, and I grew up with a very different form of education for my primary education than, New York City public schools. So I really did learn another kind of history, and it was a world history, although it did not include African history. That came later. But I think that was part of it. Food history is another thing. I've always been a traveler. I've always been an eater. My mother was actually a trained dietitian. She had an associate's degree in dietetics. So I grew up eating well. And with that eating well, I was open to it. So back in the 1970s, I was the travel editor for Essence magazine. And on the editorial calendar at one point, we said, well, how are we going to vary this? What are we going to do? Because it gets boring when it's Jessica goes here and then Jessica goes there. Oh, look, Jessica's here now. So we decided that every other month I would do travel and food. And that's kind of how I started writing about food. But my new mantra, the new thing that I keep telling people is I've been writing about food since Anthony Bourdain, food and culture, actually, since Anthony Bourdain was probably in short pants.
That's right. That's great. That's great. So what was the original diet like in Africa, in West Africa?
Well, I mean, first of all, as Americans, because we are, as a nation, geographically challenged, we think of things as being monolithic. Africa is a continent. I don't know how many languages, but there are hundreds of languages, different peoples, different groups, different ways of being in the world. Okay. That being said, it's possible to draw some generalities. It's possible to make some general sort of assumptions. The food was more likely, as you say, plant-based, with meat being used, meat and fish and crustaceans being used as seasoners rather than as ways of being in and of themselves. The anthropologist William Bascom, back in the, I guess it was 1940s or 1950s, maybe as late as the 60s, but wrote an article in which he delineated 5, I think there were, major cooking methods that were probably used by the Yoruba people of southwestern Nigeria, but that by extension can probably extend to much of the continent. And the suggestion was mentally put 3 rocks on the ground, just in your head. Put 3 rocks on the ground, build a fire in between those rocks, and use those rocks to support a pot. How do you cook? What can you cook? Well, you can boil if your pots can hold water. And the pots of the Khoi and the San people of South Africa didn't always hold water. Some of them were porous, so can't boil. But if they do hold water, you can boil. You can steam. You can fry in deep oil. You can't saute, but you can deep fry. Okay, you can't shallow fry. You can toast next to the flame. You can roast in the ashes. And there may be 1 or 2 others that I'm forgetting, but those are the basic ones. And if you look at those techniques, that's what African Americans, for the most part, do still, what we're noted for. And equally, those are the techniques that have, you know, come across and that are pretty much used in continent-wide generality in, you know, certainly in sub-Saharan Africa. And I also disagree with that whole distinction between sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, which is like somewhere else. Like North Africa is Africa. And if you don't believe it, go there and speak to those people and see your relatives pass in the streets, because they do.
No, that's great. That's great. You know, and there's a science behind at least several of those cooking techniques that really kind of points to a reduction in the process that can lead to more disease through when you boil food and you steam it. It's actually it's healthier for you, and it reduces what's called the advanced glycation end product. So very interesting when you kind of delve into that a little bit. But let me ask you, so how was the culture brought to North America? How was the culture of the eating? What kinds of foods were brought over in that journey? And we'll in the follow-up question we'll get into some of the issues of Middle Passage. But how was some of the food substances that we have even now from over in Africa?
Well, I mean, I think that there are foods that were brought. I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about that without talking about the Middle Passage and the idea of the Middle Passage being, I mean, horrific. We African Americans on this side don't really have a sense. I know I don't. Certainly didn't, and probably still don't, of the horror of it all. I mean, it's unthinkable. It's, I'm sure, in many cases unspeakable. But, you know, we don't realize the length of time. You know, we're used to short things. We complain when we got to fly from, you know, LA to New York City. It's like, it's 6 hours. You know, think 2 months. You know, when you think the Middle Passage, factor that in, that it could be 2 months. It wasn't a one-day cruise. You know, all of that awfulness that we know chained together below the decks, lying in excrement, not only your own, but your neighbors. all of that, it's not a week, it's months. And then if the ship got calmed, because they were sailing ships, it could be longer than that. So when you factor all of that in, it is A, horrific, but B, it makes you think about things. And I don't know, this is just me and how my mind works, not necessarily historic fact on this one. We hear a lot about people bringing rice in their hair and having had things braided in their hair that they brought with them, seeds and rice. It's like, trust me, if it was going to be about being enslaved, I would have spent that time with my woolly head getting the heck out of wherever I was. I would not be stopping to let anybody braid anything into my hair. Okay. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think things might have been amulets. They might have been this, that, and the other. But the real bottom line is you didn't get to pack. You know, now perhaps while in the barracoons in Western Africa, waiting for a ship to arrive, you might have been able to find X, Y, Z, P, or Q. But generally speaking, we don't think it through.
Yeah.
We don't think it through, and we also are heroic. What happens in some cases is actually, and here I'm going to say something that's non-PC, the slave traders were smart. They knew more about African cultures, Western African cultures, and particularly coastal ones, than most African Americans do today. Because it was a business venture and they were about making money. And the best way to make money was to know how to get there, when to get there, what to get while you were there. And that is not just the people to get, who to get, but what to get, because they had to provision those ships on that continent. They had to get the food to keep those ships going for those months or for those weeks on that continent. So they knew about when harvest times were on the African coast. They knew about what peoples could eat or would eat what. People from Senegambia ate rice. If you gave them yams or corn, they would refuse to eat it. Might have eaten corn, but they would refuse to eat other than rice. Rice was their principal diet. If you found, by contrast, somebody from the Bight of Benin where yams, and when I say yams, I am not talking about sweet potatoes and those candied yams. I am talking about that tuber that in the Hispanic world is known as ñame. So yams were given, and yams had their own importance. They were totemic in Ghana because old yams grow from, well, new yams grow from old yams. So they were the symbol of death and rebirth. So, but if you got somebody from there and tried to feed them rice, it's like, I ain't that. And you will read, or people, if they choose to, can read about people on ships simply refusing to eat. Close my mouth, I ain't eating it. It's another way of committing suicide. Because the only power that people recognized that they had, and they used far more frequently than we know, was what I call in the book High on the Hog, the power of no. No, I am not going to eat that. No, I am not going to do that. And some jumped overboard if they were allowed above deck and just said, I'm in this water, I'm out of here. Some refused to eat to the point where there was something invented that was called a speculum oris. And it is basically like a screw that opens, and they would force folks' mouths open so that they would be force-fed. So when you think of all of that, when you factor all of that in, what comes across in memory, really, in almost atavistic memory. Obviously, some things did come across. Okra, watermelon, what am I trying? Rice, black-eyed peas, Some people think peanuts, but peanuts are actually New World. They originate in the New World. They go to Africa early. They come back to North America via Africa, while a lot of people, which made a lot of people think that they were native to Africa. They are not. Okay, so you get all of that kind of flow that happens as well. Wow. Corn is New World, but corn had gotten well rooted on the African continent by the time of the slave trade. So that, comes.
It's already there.
But yeah, it's already there. So that, but you see that these things come across. I spoke about slave traders. There are posters, slave sale posters in the Carolinas that say newly arrived from, I think it's the Windward Coast. And that was coded language almost for, these are folks who know how to grow rice. Because the slave traders knew that these were people who grew rice. Africa has its own form of rice. We are more used to Oryza sativa, which is the rice that we see every day, but there is another genus and species, Oryza glabirima, and glabirima is native to the African continent. Wow. So we have our own rice, and that's what they knew, and that's why they went and got those people who knew how to grow rice, and that's why the rice growing culture of South Carolina, not necessarily the rice of South Carolina, but the agriculture, is based in African wisdom for the most part. And I'm going to shut up because I'm talking too long. And I know that you said 15 questions, 45 minutes, and I think we're on 2.
But that was very powerful, very helpful.
Yes.
I think something we don't think about enough is, as your book mentions, the power of no. That in that situation, all that the slaves, there wasn't many ways to protest, but that was one way. When I was in Ghana, I went to one of the slave castles, and ironically, Melania Trump had been there the day before. And one of the primary things the tour guide talked to us about, I was with some students from the University of Ghana, Legon, was about food, how food was used to control them in the castle, to try and direct behavior the way that the captors wanted them to behave. And it was a fascinating thing. How much was food used to control the slaves, whether in the slave castle or in the Middle Passage, or even on the plantation?
Well, I mean, I think as human beings, whether we like it or not, if we don't eat, we die. So food is a controller. Food, the need for food, which is a basic human need, it can be manipulated. It can very easily be used any number of ways for any number of things with any kind of captives. I mean, up until and including, the ultimate 21st century slave castles, which is our prison system. Food is important. Food becomes trade goods. I got this. You want it? You need this? I got that. I can do this if you get me that. Food is important. Everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, very powerful.
So inside on the plantations, I know, once again, to use your vernaculum, it wasn't a monolithic system in terms of everything wasn't like Gone with the Wind and Terror, and they had different levels and different people. But in generality speaking, if you will oblige, what was the food like for slaves in terms of what was provided to them?
Well, I'm gonna do something kind of wicked that any of my students would say, "Oh Lord, there she goes." Call them slaves, because that's not a condition that was theirs. They were enslaved. Someone did that to them. And I think that language is very important for us to begin to understand. When you talk about slaves, it's like, oh, that's what they are. It's like, no, they were enslaved, and they were enslaved by other people. And the people who enslaved them did it very deliberately, and it was processed. one of the things that happens is you find that you get multiple different systems, and you get different systems of how the enslaved are fed from different types of plantations, and equally from North America, Central America, South America, and so forth. For example, in Jamaica, they had something that was allowed the enslaved to have a day off, which was Sunday. And Sunday had markets, slaves had provision grounds, enslaved people, slaves. So you got me doing it now. Folks had provision grounds and could grow their own things. Now, that didn't happen quite the same way, but everywhere you see different things going on. There were systems whereby on some plantations, folks were given prepared food. It was made, it was handed out, and then people took their little whatever, bowl, calabash, what have you, went off somewhere and ate it. That was one thing. In others, they might have been given rations once a week or once a month, and then the rations, they were responsible for cooking. Up to, and in some cases, you can read about people who were given corn, but it was corn that had to then be milled. So they had to take time out of their very little time to mill the corn before they could prepare anything. So you had that system. You had another system where things may have been distributed and then they were cooked in the cabins in the areas in which people live. So there were a variety of different systems. In South Carolina, enslavement involved what was called a task system. The work jobs were given as tasks. And when you had completed your task, your time was your own. Once you had completed your task. So you find different things that happened there. So that there, I mean, that's what I meant when I said not monolithic. People foraged, people who lived near water, near streams, near the oceans for sure, foraged and, you know, could find fish. The great 19th century oystermen were for the most part African American because they had grown up in areas, the eastern seaboard, eastern Virginia, eastern coast of Maryland, and so on and so forth, where there were oysters. So part of what they foraged for, part of what they learned, part of what they knew, part of what they fed themselves with were oysters. So you've got all of these things, all of these different things that feed into how people were fed.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, we oftentimes will quote and reference Frederick Douglass and some of his statements that he made in terms of some of the poor quality foods that he was given and his awareness, and described it as barely enough to sustain the back-breaking work that's there. But we also highlight really truly that resiliency that we see what you just described here in terms of individuals going and tending and foraging or growing and having gardens. And I know it's been described, I think even I may have read or heard where you said it too as well about Thomas Jefferson providing seeds to some of his slaves to allow them to go ahead and plant, and then they were able to sell those in the marketplace. And so many had other opportunities for resiliency, tapping into ways in which they can kind of support their nutrition and other aspects there of their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when you look at it, you see certainly Jefferson, who kept copious record books and recorded all purchases, had purchased food from his enslaved peoples, as did Washington, you know. Others, I am sure, did as well. And others probably just sort of let them produce it and eat it because it was a way of saving on rations. You know, don't forget about foraging also. I mean, the whole notion of greens and foraging and things of that sort, particularly leafy greens. You, Columbus, are from or your people are from New Orleans, so the gumbo's herb, gumbo zeb, which is the traditional green gumbo that is served on Holy Thursday, that is made of an odd number of greens, 7, 9, 11, or 13, that are either fresh or foraged. Well, I had the great good fortune to be friendly with Mrs. Leah Chase, the late, great, amazing doyenne of Creole food. And I remember her saying, well, you know, she would see women on the neutral ground being that strip that we might call a median, being on the neutral ground foraging. They were looking for sour grass, or they were looking for dandelion leaves. They were looking for something that they were then going to put in their gumbo zeb, you know. So that we have a tradition of foraging. We have a long tradition of foraging, and also certainly animal husbandry and plant husbandry, if such a thing can be called that. Horticulture, let's call it that. But looking at plants, organizing plants, cross-breeding plants, creating plants, nurturing plants. And that's a long tradition as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely lived it watching my grandmother, Medea. She would go in and she would always cook up dandelions. My mom still will. She doesn't grow them, but she grows her own greens. But we'll go out and we'll get dandelions and various aspects that are there. And I live off of that. Every week I'm having some form of some greens that I'm having. But let me so tell me, how did the Great Migration influence the food culture in the African American community?
Well, I mean, the Great Migration there have been, certainly for almost as long as there has been a country, there have been African Americans in the North, in the South, and gradually moving to the Western ranges. But with the Great Migration, it explodes. It explodes. So what the Great Migration does is it takes that sort of beating heart and soul of the African American community in the United States and moves it north and west. You know, I don't know where your people are from, Eric. Where are your people from?
My people are from Jamaica, actually.
Okay.
So
Okay.
when you were talking about
That's
Jamaica earlier, that resonated with me. But there was a great migration from Jamaica too. Don't forget that.
Yeah. And depending on when in time and place, I mean, there's a time and place when a lot of Harlem had West Indian people.
Absolutely.
And certainly a lot of Brooklyn had West Indian people.
Yeah.
You know, we got a West Indian Day parade in Brooklyn.
Yeah, my parents came up in the 60s. So they came up a long. Yeah.
They came up early, but not as early as Paul Marshall, who was a writer from Barbados. And she wrote a book called Brown Girl, Brownstones. And in her book, she talks about Brownstone, Brooklyn, and the Caribbean aspects of Brownstone, Brooklyn. So your parents were second generation on that. So that there's a lot of it. But when you look at all of these cultures, you see that the foraging, the animal husbandry, the movement, the going from country to city, country people, you know, we're in Jamaica. And then I can bet you that if everybody says, oh, I'm from Mandeville, you from Mandeville? So-and-so from Mandeville, do you know so-and-so? And that's how it goes. That's how it goes. It's the same thing in the States with, you know, are you from, I don't know, pick a place. Anywhere.
Lafayette.
You from Lafayette? I'm from Lafayette. I got people in Lafayette. You know the so-and-sos? Yeah. So-and-sos, yeah, we go to the same church. It's that.
Yeah.
It's that how that works. I mean, and it works ironically in the local, arguably in the national, and probably in the international. We all have that kind of connectedness feeling. It doesn't exist as much as it used to. I was talking with somebody earlier today about my first trip to Europe, which was with my parents in the 1960s, the early 1960s. And at that point in time, if you saw a Black person on the street, You didn't have to know them. You just sort of smiled and nodded. You acknowledged each other. That doesn't happen anymore, and I think we are not greater for it. I think we are lesser for it. But that acknowledging of each other on the street, like, hey, brother, I'm glad to see you here. Not
I still do that. I still do that.
What you doing here? But just a nod, an acknowledgement. And
listen,
that
we taught my son that. We taught my son that. I still do it, you know, and my daughter will say, like, oh, Dad, you didn't even acknowledge this person. I said, I didn't see them. Otherwise, I'm for sure acknowledging them.
Yeah.
Always.
It's not necessarily a stop in a conversation, but
no.
It's almost like that the Indian namaste. The God in me salutes the God in you. But certainly back in the 60s in Europe, the interesting thing was it didn't matter whether they were from the United States or from West Africa or from everybody acknowledged. And that was kind of a global loveliness that took place.
So go ahead, Eric.
No, I'm just kind of soaking it up. I think something we talk about a lot is the importance of community, and sometimes I'm afraid that we've lost that sense of community that even I had very strong when I was a kid. And so when you talk about acknowledging, we talk a lot about stress and the impact of stress. One of the buffers of stress for Black people has been that sense of community. And the way that it, Dr. Batiste usually brings this out, releases oxytocin, which is kind of a nurturing hormone. And I fear sometimes that if we lose that, we will literally lose one of our big protectors that we've had. So it was just kind of resonating with me, a lot of what you guys were saying.
Well, I mean, I think community is something that is unfortunately increasingly being lost. But hopefully I think there are new ways of creating community. There, for example, something I wish I had done but didn't do, but want to do and will do, so I hope nobody gets on a phone to call me. But there's something called Girl Trek. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is a community of over 1 million at this point, I think, African-American women who vow to walk a half an hour a day with each other. And they give you periodically podcasts to listen to, and they are always about various heroes and sheroes, more often than not sheroes, in various realms of African-American life. So community is being created different ways, but Instagram creates community, Facebook creates community, all of these things create community, but they are communities that may be distant and disparate. I think that those communities are wonderful and basic and helpful, but I think that the other part of community, the other valent, if you will, is that people need immediate community. And I think if this pandemic and these sequesters have taught us nothing else, they are teaching us the need for that. I know they certainly taught me the need for that.
Absolutely.
I am basically a global person. And so I have lived my entire life in a global community. I'm always on a plane. I can get off the plane and have more friends perhaps in Paris than I do in New York, or find a place to stay with a friend in Cotonou, Benin, and can't do it in Philly, kind of thing, But because that's the nature of how my life has been. But with this pandemic, I had to almost consciously say at the beginning, okay, I know 5 people who live within a 5 to 10 minute walk from my house. And because I live by myself and because I am, not 15, I said, I'm giving each of these 5 people a key. Matter of trust. I'm giving them each a key, and I'm going to sign on with them every morning so they will know I'm okay.
That's good.
Create community. Sometimes you have to create community, because what has happened in this country is we don't have community.
Right.
And we've moved so many different places that we don't have stable community. You know, what is the mantra for people? I think it was, if you were in the same job for more than 5 years, then nobody's gonna look at your resume, because they're gonna wonder how and why you got stuck. 5 years, 8 years, whatever it was. My whole thing is, you know, we lose community that way. And sometimes we lose community through personality. We use community for all sorts of things. So there you go. But I think, you know, we need to really think about that, and think about, you know, think about African American communities. And, you know, we still have the church. The church is definitely bedrock. I haven't seen the PBS documentary on the Black church. But
I want to see that.
Been a backbone for folks. Fraternal organizations.
Yes.
Throughout the diaspora, a lot of things that we don't even think about, like burial societies. We think fraternal organizations, and everybody's thinking fraternities and sororities. Don't forget the Masons. Don't forget the Tents. You know, don't forget all of those kinds of fraternal organizations as well. Those are communities too, and very vivid communities in many cases. Alumni associations for HBCUs, in some cases, communities. So we've got a lot of stuff, you know, that we can draw from if we look at it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I do. Before
go ahead.
Before Jeanette jumps in, I do want to get your thoughts on one thing. I know she probably has a slew of questions for you, but I really want to get your perspective on fast food, and especially fast food, because you've had the ability to kind of watch the change in the dynamics in African American communities and cities, where now it's kind of taken on this stance of really just riddled with fast food, and you've seen our society shift from cooking to really this ultra processed refined foods that they're getting quick serve. And I was just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, you know, the bottom line is I am, and we talked about this earlier, I'm an everything in moderation girl. And that girl is probably the biggest lie of the whole part of it. But I'm an everything in moderation person. The idea, and I think fast food is the devil incarnate. Let's start there. I don't eat fast food. Okay. I don't eat fast food, which isn't to say that if I'm on the Connecticut Turnpike and there's a rest stop and there's a McDonald's, I might have one, but it would be one in 6 months or one in a year. That's not going to kill anybody, unless you were seriously allergic to whatever goes in those things. But, you know, but
I am.
Well, then that would be because you have weakened your system by not. Story. That's an argument we don't need to have.
Let's not go there. Let's not go here.
We'll say that for the backstage conversation.
Well, there you go. There you go. But my point is simply on that I think moderation in all things is a good mantra. I don't personally eat fast food.
Okay.
I cook every night. People sort of say, when do you cook? It's like, if I don't cook, I don't eat. It's real. I cook.
Don't work, you don't eat. Don't cook, you don't eat.
Exactly. So, I mean, but I am single. I've never had to cook every meal for a husband or a child, which means I have a very different attitude toward cooking. If I don't feel like doing it at night, there's no little person tugging on my hem going, "Mom, I'm hungry." I can understand that presents questions, stress, and difficulties. But I think you choose your battles.
Absolutely.
You choose your battles. You decide how far down the fast food train are you going.
Absolutely. Well, let me go ahead and get started with some of these questions that we have.
We're going to get some of that, and we go from there.
Yes. And so just for those who are watching, we do have a Dr. Jessica B. Harris on, and unfortunately her camera is not working, so we're not talking to ourselves. There is a real person behind that black screen.
I think they can hear my voice.
They can hear you. I just wanted to know that you are real. You are real if you just joined. The second thing I want to say is that, Dr. Harris, I have never had Eric or Columbus be as quiet as they have been on this conversation. You have been dropping gems, and they are sitting back, relaxing, and it sounds like they've got you doing all the work instead of, really getting in here. So let's see what we can do to see if maybe we can get them moving a little bit more on today's discussion. But one of the questions that we received in the chat window is, are the descendants of the enslaved healthier when we eat locally or when we eat the food of our ancestors? Eric, we'll start with you.
Well, I definitely think that if we could go back to eating a lot of the foods that Dr. Harris described initially, and yes, they're very specific, or were very specific to tribes then. But if we have the advantage from the distance of the diaspora to be able to take all of the best aspects of different African cultures and bring them together into like a melting pot for us to have a rich heritage here in the United States. And in my time in Africa, I'd say that if you look at the like I've mentioned the food markets I went to there with the amazing fruits and vegetables and greens and all the things that they have, I'd say if we switch back to that kind of eating, where more of our food came straight from the ground, and was so rich in antioxidants and phytonutrients, we'd be a lot healthier than those who don't eat McDonald's once a year, as Dr. Harris just mentioned. They eat McDonald's 3 and 4 times a week, Burger King 2-3 times a week, and then what they eat at home is Pop-Tarts and basically TV dinners. We'd be far healthier on the original African diet.
Okay. Dr. Harris, what is your favorite meal to eat and what is your favorite meal to make?
Oh, good Lord. I could say dinner and answer both questions, but I am pretty omnivorous. I am, much to the two doctors' great dismays, still a carnivore.
Okay.
And a contented one, I might add. I eat a lot of, but I'm also a fruit and vegetable person.
Okay.
I mean, I have, they said what, 5 fruits a day. I have at least 10.
All right.
No meal comes without a salad.
Okay.
No meat, and I'm not talking about massive amounts of meat. I've taken to, you get something, I cut it in half and put half away for the next time. Comes without 2 or 3 vegetables on the side.
Okay.
I am moderate, and I'm moderate to the point where during this COVID sequester, because I'm not eating in restaurants, which I do fairly frequently for work as much as for anything else, I lost 12 pounds without trying to.
Okay. All right. Because you were able to control it.
Because I'm stuck at home.
Yeah.
So it wasn't an exercise 12 pounds. It was a diet 12 pounds.
Okay.
That have stayed off.
Yeah. That you can control what you're putting in your food versus at a restaurant. You can't control how much oil or how much butter or whatever the case may be.
Or how much wine you're drinking with your friends. But I think that in terms of all of that, what did I have for dinner? I can't even remember what I had for dinner last night, which is not a good thing.
Okay. The next question.
I know what I had for dinner last night. Actually, no, I don't.
Okay. But you had dinner. That's why you were going to say
I did have dinner, and it was some. Oh no, I know what I had. I think that might have been anyhow. Let's not get into how forgetful she is about what she ate. But I know I recently had a gumbo for dinner, and the thing about having the gumbo was, while I liked the gumbo, and it wasn't a gumbo I made, it was a gumbo that had been given to me. It was too thin, So I took the gumbo, and because I had okra, because I've always got okra if I can find it,
Okay.
I put up about, maybe 6 okra pods, put that in with the gumbo, and let the gumbo cook again. Put another cup of water in the stew, put some okra in it, and the okra did its job. It thickened the gumbo. That's why okra is such a useful vegetable, because it will take a thin soup and thicken it. And I do remember now what I had to eat for dinner last night. And I remember why I don't remember. I was doing a video for some folks at home.
Okay.
And we did a video demonstrating a Senegalese dish, which is called chicken yassa.
Okay.
And so I had yassa for dinner last night. And that is basically a chicken that is marinated with lemon juice and onion overnight, and then grilled. Chicken. And then the chicken gets put back with the onion marinade and a couple tablespoons of oil added. You sweat the onions until they are, if you're lucky, you take them long enough so that they caramelize. And you get the onions, then you put the chicken back in it. You add a couple of cups of water and you stew it. So it's very flavorful because it has been marinated, grilled, and stewed.
Okay.
And then that gets served with rice. And I had a salad. And
Very
there
good.
were olives and carrots in it as well.
Fantastic. So this is the next question. What do you want the African Americans and the people in general to know about the culinary history of African or of the blacks?
I think what I want them to know is that it is wide and deep and varied. It is not, as I've said, monolithic.
Yeah.
It is not all, hog meat and hominy, although that certainly plays a part in it. It is it is a range. It is everything from kala in New Orleans, which are rice fritters that were sold by African women, Creoles of color, in front of church. It's a fritter. It was one of those dishes that was fried in deep oil.
Okay.
But it was a fritter that was served for people who were coming out of mass. So a lot of people actually used food to buy their freedom because they got money. Because food, we talked about whether or not food could be used to coerce folks. Food could equally be used to raise money. And a lot of African Americans during the period of enslavement bought their freedom through either farming food or selling food, selling raw food, that is to say, fruits and vegetables and the things that they had farmed, or selling cooked food, the things that they purveyed. So food has been as good to us as it has been bad to us.
Okay. And Eric, how about you?
Repeat my question again, Didnt.
What do you want the people to know about the African American culinary history, Black America's history, culinary history?
I think one of the things I just said that is very true and profound is how diverse it is. I mean, like I said, my parents are Jamaican, and the way Jamaicans prepare food is very different than Blacks would prepare food, on the American mainland, or even on some of the other islands. Some of the islands had a lot of mix of food from the East Indies. So if you go to Trinidad or Guyana, you get roti and you get curry things there that are actually very Indian, but got mixed into the culture. So it is very varied. I would say food. Fortunately for us, we were resilient in finding ways to get the kind of foods into us that did give us the strength and keep us alive. Dr. Joe Furman talks about that in his book, Fast Food Genocide, how well Black Americans, when we got a chance to grow food, we did. And we were actually able to give ourselves some nutrients from that.
Okay. How about you, Columbus?
I think it's just really the flavors. I think it's all been said here, diversity, of the cultures within our Black community, whether from Africa, whether from the Caribbean, whether or not inside the States. And now we've become all blended together. And I think one of the things that we've lost is we've lost that sense that Dr. Harris really has brought up, is that if you listen to her, she brings up the fact that she actually cooks. She actually is using spices. She's using a rich amount of fruits and vegetables inside of her diet. She's not eating out of a box. She's not eating out of a can on a regular basis, at least. But she's actually taking the time and still using a lot of the methods that she described, even in the original sense of how folks cook, of broiling or boiling and various things, steaming. And she's using that right now to enrich herself. And so I think we've lost that. And I think that we have to reclaim that. We have to reclaim the healing power from the spices, the healing power from the vegetables, the healing power from even standing and socializing. That the whole eating process, it's so intricate from the standpoint your digestive system gets going just before, as you start just talking about it, right? As you start to salivate, as you're standing, you're using non-exercise activity thermogenesis and chopping and standing, you're actually building the perfect environment that primes your body for eating health-sustaining foods. And so I think this community is important. I think our diversity is important. I think really understanding what is helpful for us is extremely important going forward, because we're suffering as a group, and that's evident by our lack of community. It's evident by our disease burden from some of the food-like substances that we eat, as opposed to real food, like she's noting.
Yeah, there was a lot of chatter and discussion in the chat window when we were talking about the loss of community, as a result of COVID and before COVID, so definitely that struck a nerve with a lot of the people who are watching. And so just the question back again, what do you all want people to know? We're at the end of Black History Month. What do you want them to know about their Black history? If you had to leave them with one thing, Dr. Harris, what would that be?
First of all, we have survived the unspeakable, and we need to give ourselves credit for that.
Absolutely.
Secondly, we are, to the degree we assume it, in charge of ourselves. And thirdly, in the words of George C. Wolfe's play, The Colored Museum, we're fabulous.
All right.
That's right.
Okay. Dr. Walsh, Eric?
I think I would say we're contributors. I think when I was growing up, what fascinated me was to find out how much Black America, and I'll stick to just America and not even think of the rest of the Black world. In America, how much we contributed to this country, from the design of Washington, D.C., to the invention of the traffic lights, and on and on and on. Charles Drew, his contributions to medicine and blood transfusions, and I can go on and on and on. Right. And it's unfortunate because we're often looked at as detractors, when in fact there is no America without Black America.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
Dr. Batiste?
I think it's important to use the words of one former president. Don't believe the fake news about us, right? That we are richer, we're deeper, we're smart, we're educated, we're real. And we're a part of this society, and that we have been contributors across the board. I mean, you look at the likes of Dr. Harris going abroad to study, and I think of the first Black physician, James McCune, who actually went to Glasgow in order to get his degree. I think of Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first African-American physician, female physician, to get her degree. When I think of the likes of Vivian Thomas, who was a janitor because of the fact he was unable to have the means or the opportunity to become a surgeon, was the one who taught the surgeons how to treat the blue babies and the Blaylock Talzig, right? And so God has blessed us. We have a rich and deep DNA system and the heritage that we come from. And our heritage doesn't just stop in terms of who we are. It's our food, it's our culture, and we have to embrace it and not be ashamed of it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Well, listen, it's been A pleasure. So Danette is right. I was actually just sitting and listening, and I lost what I was supposed to do. I know that they're normally they're going to tell me behind the scenes, hey, listen, you were driving the conversation right, because I actually was just listening.
Same.
And I'm so appreciative to you.
And I tell you what was so nice for me is I really enjoyed being an undergraduate at an HBCU. My major was a science major, biology and chemistry, and I used to really enjoy going into the history department and being able to take history classes, because I, like you, Dr. Harris, I find history so fascinating. And that's really what I felt like tonight, is that I was able to be at the foot of a great historian and just kind of soak it all up.
Thank you. I wish I had known you were from Jamaica. I'd have had my Jamaican notes more in my head. I got serious Jamaican cred. I spent Hurricane Gilbert in Jamaica.
Wow, Gilbert was wicked.
You haven't lived through a hurricane in Jamaica.
No, in Miami, not Jamaica.
No. Gilbert in Jamaica, in Constant Spring, and when I go to Jamaica, I go to Kingston, which means I'm hardcore.
No, you're hardcore, because I go to Kingston. Tourists don't go to Kingston.
Nobody. Tourists do not go to Kingston.
You're right about that.
I go to Kingston and stay with friends.
Oh no, you're a real Jamaican.
Yeah.
Well, I've only been there once, and I don't know if my wife is going to go with me again, but I plan on making it back to Jamaica at some point in the near future.
Yeah, no, I've been to just about every island in the Caribbean, with the possible exception of Mustique.
Wow, that's incredible. Listen, this has been incredible, having the opportunity to even chat with you before, leading up to tonight's talk, during tonight's talk. And I know that those who've tuned in have appreciated it. I know that they've listened. I know they've enjoyed it. And so I want to encourage those who are listening right now, make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube. Pass along this segment with Dr. Harris. It should be something staunched in every Black History Month, and Black History Month should be every month. So we should replay this on a regular basis.
Isn't it every month? I thought it was every month. Okay.
It needs to be every month.
365, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Yes.
It's every month for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. That's right. So listen, we're going to sign off now, folks, and we look forward to meeting you back next week. Tell a friend. We're going to be talking about something that's very important in terms of kidney failure. And we're going to be having a nephrologist on who's going to talk about the impact of kidney failure and kidney disease inside the African American community and what we can do about it. So look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Dr. Harris.
Good night, Joe.
Thank you, Dr. Harris.
Take care.